There was a woman who had a 6-year-old son. One day, she bought a new mobile phone. When she came home from work, she started cooking dinner and left her phone down on the kitchen table. Her son came into the kitchen and saw the phone. He asked his mother if he could play with it. She told him that he could, as long as he didn't call anyone or deleted any text messages. Of course, the boy agreed and went off to his bedroom to play with the phone. Around 10 p.m. that night, she went upstairs to tuck her son and found him fast asleep in his bed. The new cell phone was lying on the ground beside the bed. She picked it up and began browsing through the settings to make sure he had not deleted anything. She noticed some minor changes. He had changed the theme, the background, and had given her a new ringtone. She noticed that he had taken some pictures with the cell phone. She opened the images folders and browsed through them. How cute, she thought. He had been taking pictures of himself. Then she came across the last photo in the folder. When she first saw it, she couldn't quite believe it. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? It was a photograph of her son lying asleep on her bed, but the disturbing thing what was lurking in the far left corner of the picture. It seemed to show the left side of the creepy old woman's face. I grew up on a farm in a remote area, and I have always been uneasy about being in the house by myself at night. There are no street lights in the area, and at night it is pitch black outside. One night, my parents went out and I was home alone. I was sitting on the couch when the phone rang. I picked it up and heard an automated voice said, "Would you like to accept a collect from?" Then I heard a voice say my name. It was my voice. I was freaked out, but I accepted the call. "Hello?" I said nervously. There was no reply. I could hear someone breathing on the other end of the lane. Then they hung up. I was standing by the sliding glass door in the kitchen, and just then, I happened to glance outside. In the darkness, I could make out a figure standing there. I was so terrified, I ran to my dad's room and grabbed his gun. I hid there in the bedroom, and I didn't come out until my parents returned 20 minutes later. I still don't know what happened that night. Was it the future me calling me to warn me? Did that call save my life? I guess I'll never know. This happened about 15 years ago. I was working nights at the time and started working at around 9 p.m. One night, I arrived at work and my supervisor gave me a confused look. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I'm working tonight," I replied. "But you called in sick a few hours ago," he said. I was a bit confused. It must have been someone else, I laughed. I looked at the messages that said that I had called in. The call came at 6:50 p.m. and the message said that I had gotten sick while I was out cleaning up after a storm the night before. There had been a storm, but I had never gone out to clean up. The whole thing struck to me as very weird. I decided to call my wife and tell her about it. I picked up the phone and dialed my home phone number. It rang twice before it was picked up, and a raspy male voice said, "Hello?" I was so shocked. I didn't even know what to do. I looked at the phone to make sure I had dialed the right number. The person on the other end said, "Hello?" again in the same raspy voice. "Hello? Who is this?" I said nervously. "This is Taylor," the voice replied. "Who is this?" A chill ran down my spine. "My name is Taylor." "Where's Anne?" I said, my voice shaking. I wanted it to scream. "Hands in bed," the voice replied. "Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor there was an emergency and I needed to get home immediately. As I was leaving, my confused superior picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" I drove home as fast as I could. My mind was racing. I couldn't understand what was going on. When I got to my house, I burst through the front door and found my wife sitting in the living room, calmly watching the TV. She was so shocked to see me home early. She said there was no one else in the house and the phone hadn't rung all night. I picked up my phone to call the supervisor, but the line was dead. The next evening, when I went back to work, my supervisor gave me a weird look and asked, "How the hell did you do that?" He told me that when I left the night before, he had picked up the phone, and when he realized that the person on the other end of the line sounded exactly like me, he freaked out and hung up. It got even more weirder. He said that a minute later, I had called back from home and asked what was going on. According to him, I was angry and said I was sick and didn't feel like playing games and told him to stop prank calling me and hung up. I just stared at my supervisor and told him I had no idea what the heck was going on. I later found out that the phone line in my area had been knocked down by the storm that night before. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. My brother and I went to college together, and we shared a small 2-bedroom apartment. We were both very different. He was always in bed early, and I always stayed up till all hours of the night. One evening, he came home from college looking exhausted and went straight to bed. I stayed up in the living room watching TV and playing video games. Around midnight, I was getting tired, so I decided to go to bed. Just then, the phone rang. When I answered, it was an automated voice of the operator said, "You have a collect call from a..." Thing was, when it got to the part where the other person is supposed to identify itself, it was my brother's voice. He sounded desperate, and the noise in the background sounded like he was just off a busy interstate. I turned around. From where I was standing, I could still clearly see my brother lying in his bed asleep, and his cell phone was lying on the kitchen corner beside me. I was so unnerved that I refused to accept the call. I was shaking, and I barely managed to get any sleep that night. One evening, when I was on my way to my best friend's house, as I was driving on the motorway, I got a call from him. He said he might be a little late because he had been out shopping, but he was on his way home. At that point, while I was still on the phone with him, I ran into a traffic jam on the motorway. I told him I would probably be late as well. We continued our conversation and the traffic slowly started to move again. I told my friend that it looked like there has been an accident on the motorway. He asked if I could see what had happened. As I was coming up to the scene of the accident, I told him that a car hit the barrier and flipped over. There were paramedics loading a dead body into the back of an ambulance. My friend let out a long sigh and said, "What a shame." As I slowly drove past the wreck, I was horrified to see that it was my friend's car. At the very moment, the phone suddenly hung up. It was my friend who died in the crash that night. The police said he was killed on impact. Many years ago, I was working the graveyard shift at a hotel. It was late and I was tired. I just wanted to go home. I wasn't supposed to leave early, so I wrote a note and left it there for my boss. The note said that I had left early because my brother was stranded outside of town and needed me to pick him up. It was a complete lie, but I needed to get a good excuse to leave early. I drove home and went to bed. A few hours later, I was woken by a sound of my phone ringing. It was my brother. He told me he was stranded outside of town and he needed me to pick him up. That's so weird, I said. That's exactly the same lie I made up to tell my boss so I could leave early. That's not weird, my brother replied. I'll show you what's weird when you get here. I drove over to meet him, and when I arrived, he took out his phone and put it up in my ear. He played a message that he received when he woke up that morning. It was a creepy computerized voice, and it all said, "You're stuck." It freaked us both out, and we couldn't never figure out where the call had came from. That's the strangest, creepiest thing that's ever happened to me in my life.